In the year 627 CE, during one of the darkest moments for the fledgling Muslim community, the city of Medina stood on the brink of annihilation. Surrounded by a coalition of Quraysh and their allies, Muslims dug a trench to stave off an invasion that seemed impossible to repel. It was the Battle of the Trench, and the odds were overwhelming. As hunger gnawed at their resolve and fear gripped their hearts, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, struck a rock while digging the trench. Sparks flew, and with them came words that astonished those around him. Allah has promised me the keys to Syria, Persia, and Yemen. For many these words seemed incomprehensible. The Quraysh mocked him, and even among some of his own people, whispers of doubt arose. How could a besieged and starving community dream of conquering the greatest empires of the time? Yet the Prophet's faith remained unshaken. He saw beyond the trench, beyond the desert, to a future where Islam would rise to reach the farthest corners of the known world. Less than a decade later, that prophecy began to unfold with stunning clarity. The Muslims, once besieged and vulnerable, carried the banner of Islam into the lands of the Roman Empire. And in 636 CE, at a place called Yarmouk, this prophecy would find its dramatic fulfillment in a battle that forever changed the course of history. By 636 CE, the Roman Empire stood at a pinnacle of power. Under Emperor Heraclius, the Romans had defeated their ancient rival, the Sasanian Empire, and reclaimed Jerusalem, restoring the true cross and reaffirming their dominance as a superpower. This was no empire in decline. This was a revitalized Rome, ready to defend its territories with all its might. Yet from the deserts of Arabia, a new force had risen. The Rashidun Caliphate, united under the leadership of Caliph Umar, was driven by an extraordinary vision of faith and justice. Rashidun armies swept across Arabia and into Syria, the jewel of the Roman Levant. Heraclius, recognizing the threat, gathered a coalition army of nearly 100,000 men, Greeks, Armenians, Slavs, and Christian Arabs. At its head stood General Vahan, a seasoned and confident leader. Outnumbered 4-1, Khalid would face one of the greatest tests of his military genius. The stage was set in the Yarmouk Valley. Confident in his army's superiority, Vahan sought to avoid bloodshed, believing that these desert tribesmen could be persuaded to withdraw. He offered gold and safe passage back to Arabia in exchange for peace, but his words were laced with condescension. Vahan mocked the Muslims, calling them nomads of the desert, and ridiculing their audacity to challenge the Roman Empire. He sneered, "Why do you come here to die? Is there not enough sand in Arabia to bury your dead?" Khalid, calm and unshaken, responded with the conviction of a man driven by purpose. He declared, "We do not fight for gold, but for the spread of Allah's word. If you accept Islam, you will be our brothers. If you refuse, you must pay the jizya. And if you reject both, then we have no choice but to meet you in battle." The negotiations ended in failure, but the words exchanged revealed the stark contrast between the two sides. For the Romans, this was a war of politics and territory. For the Muslims, it was a mission to fulfill the prophecy of their prophet and establish justice under divine guidance. The first day of the Battle of Yarmouk began with Roman cavalry probing the Rashidun lines. General Vahan, confident in his superior numbers, sought to overwhelm Khalid's smaller force with an initial show of strength. His cavalry tested the Muslim flanks, looking for weaknesses to exploit. But Khalid had prepared his army with meticulous precision. Divided into 5 corps, each led by experienced commanders, the Rashidun forces were not only disciplined but highly flexible. They absorbed the Roman attacks with resilience, holding their lines against the onslaught. As the sun set, the Romans had made no progress. The insults hurled during negotiations now seemed hollow, as the desert tribesmen proved their mettle against one of the most powerful armies in the world. On the second day, Vahan unleashed the might of the Roman heavy cavalry, directing them toward the Rashidun center in a bid to break their lines. Thousands of armored knights thundered forward, their lances gleaming as they charged with devastating force. But Khalid, anticipating this move, had set a trap. He ordered his center to feign retreat, luring the Roman cavalry deeper into the battlefield. Then, with a signal from Khalid, the Rashidun reserve struck from the flanks, encircling and annihilating the advancing Roman forces. By nightfall, the battlefield belonged to the Muslims. Khalid's tactics had turned Rome's greatest strength into its greatest liability, shattering the morale of the once confident Roman army. The third day brought grueling attrition. The blistering heat of the Yarmouk Valley tested the endurance of both armies. Khalid seized his moment. Identifying a weakness in the Roman left flank, he concentrated his cavalry for a decisive assault. The Rashidun forces swept through the flank, collapsing the Roman lines and sowing panic throughout their ranks. By the fifth day, the Roman army was in full retreat. Trapped between the advancing Rashidun forces and the steep ravines of the Yarmouk River, thousands of Roman soldiers were killed or captured. What had begun as a confident display of Roman power ended in utter disarray. The sixth and final day saw the Rashidun forces deliver the finishing blow. Pursuing the fleeing Romans into the ravines, Khalid's army ensured that no remnants would regroup. For the Rashidun Caliphate, Yarmouk was not merely a military victory. It was the fulfillment of a prophecy spoken years before in Medina. The words of the Prophet Muhammad, ridiculed by his enemies and doubted by some of his own, now stood vindicated on the battlefield of Yarmouk. The Battle of Yarmouk was more than a clash of arms. It was a transformation of the ancient world. It marked the end of Roman dominance in the Levant and the rise of Islamic governance, fulfilling a vision foretold years before. It was a gateway to an era of unprecedented expansion. And for the Romans, it was a sobering reminder that even the mightiest empires could be overcome by faith, unity, and strategy. Today, the Yarmouk River flows silently, its waters bearing witness to a battle that reshaped civilizations and fulfilled a destiny foretold.